Always one of the highlights of the entire year is handing out a final report to the LEC. So, with that, I'll be presenting the Coldwater Task Group today and basically giving an overview talk on the state of the Lake Erie Coldwater fish community. See if I can get the right one. There we go. We have a pretty broad membership, not only covering all of the member agencies around the lake, but also contain members from DFO, USGS, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well too. So quite a few members span our group doing various different things in here, and with the various members, we also have a huge number of charges to report on here. 8, I think it's the most out of any of the task groups that we have on Lake Erie today. With those, and I'll be hitting those not in this complete order, but I'll be speaking to all of them today, except for number 4, which is our sea lamprey status. Kevin from DFO will be covering that in the following talk, and then I'm not going to be talking about our whitefish charge there on number 8 as well too. Chris spoke to that earlier. Right now, a lot of that work is occurring not only in the task group, but also through the data deficient group right now, and there's been a lot of progress in that. We're expected to have a final report out on that sometime this year, so I just want to let you know there's a lot of progress being done on that with modeling as well too. So go along with that. We also have a lot of there is obviously fish community goals and objectives for Lake Erie's Coldwater fish community there. Primarily secure a deep offshore waters of the East Basin with lake trout and burbot as key predators. Our metrics to measure, which I'm going to be talking about throughout this talk and then summing them up at the end, are to restore lake trout to safe self-sustainability. Burbot and core gonids are important ecologically. Cisco return as the dominant planktivore. Provide sustainable harvest of lake whitefish, lake trout, steelhead, and other salmonids. And then sea lamprey are requiring control, considered a pest species. Throughout the talk, I'll refer to 2 main surveys here. The first one is our Coldwater Assessment Survey. That is a East Basin survey completed during the month of August. It's a gill netting survey. A1 and A2 were sampled by New York, A3, A4 by Pennsylvania, and then A5 through A8 are accomplished through a combination of the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry and the USGS there. And the numbers that you see on there are the number of sets and then the locations of those. Those basically are sets because of the survey design, sort of rim the edge of the cold water throughout the basin. But our other survey I'll talk about is the Ontario Partnership Gillnet Survey. That does, although that's just relegated on the Ontario side, it does do a much better job getting overall spatial coverage of the basin during that survey. And that was completed, I think, in 37 bottom nets and canned gill nets in 2015. So the first charge I'm going to skip to here is charge 7 is our Cisco charge. And for those of you who look close at that picture, we're going to come back to it here in a minute. So in 2015, we actually had 4 Cisco that were reported in Lake Erie. I don't think a pointer here works on anything. But those were to the sets all the way to the 2 of the sets to the east that were caught in some perch gill nets, and 2 in smelt trawls as well too. So a total in the last 20 years of 47 Ciscos that have been captured in Lake Erie, as well as some larval and juveniles caught over in the Lake St. Clair and the Detroit River as well. So one of the questions that we've had is are these a remnant Lake Erie stock, or are these transients that maybe possibly came down from Lake Huron? And we had an analysis done by Rocky Ward in the early 2000s. Again, a sample size of only 9, so take that into consideration. But those results said that they most closely resembled our historic, and historic, I mean by samples taken in the 40s and 50s of our Lake Erie Cisco. However, they were closest to the recent samples to Lake Huron Cisco. But that survey, we couldn't actually replicate it. The results kind of got lost. In the meanwhile, we've had a bunch of samples that have been growing here as we collect fish, a few every year, not a whole lot, but a few come in. And we have whole fish, we have scales, and we have tissues to work with as well too. So this past year, there's been a lot of progress made. Actually, three different studies on our contemporary fish that we've been collecting recently. One by Wendy Stott at the USGS, doing a genetic analysis, Dan Ewell and others from the Upper Great Lakes doing a morphometric analysis, and then Andrew Muir and Randy Eschenroder and others doing meuristics and morphometrics as well too. Again, looking at all of these different fish and trying to make heads or tails of them. And the preliminary results of those suggest that the Lake Erie Cisco, at least of the genetic and morphometrics, are unlike our historically described albus and artidae, which are species forms that were present in Lake Erie. In the work done by Randy and Andrew suggests that most of the recent samples are hybrids of deep water forms similar to what exists in Lake Huron right now. The bottom line with that is that the variation indicates that our contemporary Lake Erie samples are not pristine, unique ones that really conserve the historic Lake Erie genotype that was present in our old Cisco population. However, those results are not final yet. There's a lot of plans going on in 2016 with those, including barcoding, microsatellite DNA analysis, amongst other things here. And the bottom line with this is that we hope by fall of 2016 that we should be able to make a defensible statement about the origin and uniqueness of these contemporary samples, meaning are they unique historic or are they downstream drifters from Lake Huron? And with that, hopefully be able to complete our impediments document and move forward with a decision on where we're going with Cisco and Lake Erie in the future. In case you didn't catch that, those weren't both Cisco on the screen. The top one is actually a lake whitefish, which again poses its own problems. Bottom one is a Cisco. All right, charge 2, and we're going to move right into lake whitefish. Commercial lake whitefish harvest in 2015 was a little over 126,000 pounds. That is the lowest harvest in Lake Erie since the late 1980s. Most of that was in Ontario. Most of the harvest was in Ontario and Ohio in 2015. By grid, looking at that, the majority of the harvest again came on the Ontario waters around the islands, in Ohio waters off the mouth of the Maumee River. There was also a new trap netter in Pennsylvania that harvested some fish as well over that way. But again, the majority of the harvest coming from the islands into the west. Trap net catches in the U.S. trap net fishery. Again, Ohio has been the yellow bars, has been fairly consistent for the last 6 years. With that, Pennsylvania, again, had some harvest from a trap netter guy that got set up in 2014. Their harvest prior to that was gill nets, and they had no harvest prior to that. Looking at the harvest by age coming in, this is from the Ontario catches in the fall. I made the age 7 group a wacky color on there because that's the one that we really need to pay attention to. We have a couple age groups that have been moving through here. Last good year classes has been a big one in 2003, an average one in 2005, and virtually no recruitment after that. And those are really what's carrying the fishery right now out there is those 7+ year classes, and they've been doing so for the last 5-6 years. Moving over to our assessment netting, this is from both surveys. On the left-hand axis is our Coldwater assessment. That'll be the gray bar in the background. Again, out of 133 gill net sets in 2015, we caught 4 lake whitefish. That gives a CPE of virtually 0, just barely above 0 on there for 2015. That has been a declining trend now since about 2007 in those surveys, and at the lowest point since the mid-1980s. Partnership program is on the right-hand axis. That is split into ages 0 through 2 and then ages 3 and over for a point here. But if you look at the 3 and over, again, a very similar trend to what we saw in the Coldwater assessment survey there. Very low catches now, peaked in the most recent times back in the mid-2000s. You will notice on the 0 through 2s that we do see a little blip up in 2014, which you can't see on there, but there is, and then a little bit more in 2015, indicating that we do have a little recruitment coming on with lake whitefish. And again, that is shown in this particular graph. This is from Ohio trawls over in the West Basin there, and you can see the huge 2003 year class. Another blip up in 2005. Since then, virtually very low recruitment until the last 2 years. Looks like 2015, we at least had some recruitment that occurred. Moving on to steelhead. A lot of our steelhead fishery revolves around stocking. We do have some natural reproduction that occurs, but it is a very minor component of the population. Steelhead stocking in 2015 was about 1.789 yearlings stocked. That has been fairly consistent since about 1999, so about for 15, 16 years now. We've been stocking about somewhere around 1.8 to 1.9 million steelhead annually into Lake Erie. Again, just for reference, no more Chinooks and cohos, Pacific salmon are stocked into Lake Erie for quite a while now. Minor stockings of brown trout, and then lake trout are thrown in there as well. We'll talk about lake trout a little bit later in the talk. By jurisdiction in 2015, bulk of the fish going in Pennsylvania, followed by Ohio, lesser numbers in New York, and then Ontario and Michigan. In the realm of things, do contribute relatively few numbers as far as the numbers go. So the bulk of our fishery, of our stocking occurs on the South Shore in the U.S. jurisdictions, and it's been that way for quite a long time now. Estimated harvest from our lake creel out in the open lake used to be a lot more significant back in the late 90s, early 2000s. That has diminished. Our harvest comparatively to then has been relatively consistent since about the mid 2000s and low. Again, just for reference, there is a number of years there the Ontario data is not available for that, but in 2014 their harvest was relatively low and comparable to what happened in the U.S. jurisdictions. We get a much better feel for steelhead from our tributaries. Our tributary fisheries is the bulk of the fishery. That's where the bulk of the harvest occurs as well too. These are catch rates from various years throughout time by various jurisdictions. They in certain time periods they actually line up very well with each other across the jurisdictions. Late 80s through the mid 90s, catch rates were generally very low, averaging about 0.15 fish an hour. In the mid 2000s, regardless of where you were, average catch rates were 0.6 fish an hour, which is very high. We had a large downturn in the tributary fisheries beginning in the 2009 fishing year. Tributary catch rates from them in Ohio and New York have ranged from about 0.35 to 0.38 fish an hour, including a recent survey in New York. Moving onward to burbot. Commercial harvest of burbot is basically bycatch and has been for quite a while. Here, only about 2,700 pounds harvested in 2015. Again, harvest has been fairly low in that fishery, under 5,000 pounds since the mid-2000s. By net, this is from the Coldwater assessment there. Those are catch per net, very low on both the North Shore and the South Shore surveys, regardless, very even across and very low comparatively. Numbers used to be much higher, especially over on the Ontario side. We'll see that in this graph right here, peaking about in the early to mid-2000s. Since then, in all jurisdictions, we've seen a huge downturn in the population. CPEs right now are the lowest that they've been in almost every one of the surveys. Compared to the peak down to the decline now over the past decade, it's been about a 95% decline in our burbot population. We see a very similar trend happening in the partnership gillnet index as well. Same peaks happening in the East and Pennsylvania Ridge areas, very low in recent years as well. Age frequency, we're working off a lot of older fish. We're getting very little recruitment. Again, look at the N here out of the surveys is only 34 fish that we have age data on there. A lot of those fish are age 13 and older in the population. There is some reproduction that has occurred, some fish at the younger ages, but not a whole lot comparatively to the past. One thing that we've been seeing is a lot of anomalies that have been occurring in the burbot gonads, and the pictures that you see up there are actually almost like hard masses, especially in the females. Their eggs are fused together. A lot of times they're black and hardened together. That had been fairly common and being seen in all the surveys. Pennsylvania this past year did give, not ones with the hardened masses, but did give in, was able to contribute to some samples to Lamar Fish Health Center there, and they did detect the presence of a mycobacteria infection there, which had never been determined in the detected in a burbot before. The significance of that is relatively unknown at times, but at least it is a hint that there's something going on with our burbot in the lake there, and we need to look at some of these further. So we are seeking funding to try to identify what is occurring and if this is something that's having an impact on the population. Moving on to the last charge we'll cover here is lake trout. Our lake trout population is built entirely by stocking. Up to this point in time, we have no detectable natural reproduction occurring. Stocking numbers have been elevated, especially in recent years, and some of that has to do with some of our stocking moving over into the West Basin. We'll talk about that on the next slide. A few things just to point at right now is in recent years, we've had some different strains going in that have performed very well. The gray strain is the Lake Champlain strain, and you notice those in the bar, and those are going to be ones that pay attention, especially a couple ones some that were stocked in 2008 and 2009. Our Finger Lake strain, or sometimes referred to as Senecas, have been very commonly stocked throughout our history of Lake Erie. They tend to perform very well in the face of sea lamprey predation. And then we have some yellow bars as well there too, starting in 2004 through 2008, and those were Klondikes. those were a deep water form that we had stocked in Lake Erie, and you're going to see I separate those out in a few of the graphs coming up here as well. On the North Shore, there's also stocking of a Slate Island strain, which is included in the Superior group. So for 5 years, beginning in 2013, carrying on through our 2017 stocking, before this, I guess the majority of our stocking has occurred mainly off of the New York waters. And you'll see that in the next graph coming up, centered off of the orange blob way over to in the farthest one of the East Basin, and then on Nanticoke Shoal on the North Shore. But for the last 5 years, or for this 5-year group here, we actually have a fall fingerling and then a spring yearling stocking occurring over off of the islands in Catawba, off of Fairport, and then some in Pennsylvania as well too. And we're going to be assessing how those fish show up and perform in our future surveys. And the whole reason for this is trying to distribute fish around the lake and try to get them to come back to some areas that we feel have more favorable spawning habitat that is available in the lake. So our net per effort here, this is from our Coldwater assessment group, and it very much goes with where our bulk of our stocking has occurred. The bulk of our catches have been off of Dunkirk, a very high CPE. There, again, that's where a lot of the stocking has occurred until recent years. The numbers go less as you move into A3 and A4 in Pennsylvania waters, and then less even further as you go across the border into Ontario, and then to the west of that as well too. Mean lake trout abundance sort of goes hand in hand with what you just saw. There increases since 2000 in every one of the jurisdictions. New York abundance has been the highest that it's ever been in its survey in the previous 2 years. Increases occurred in both Pennsylvania and Ontario waters in 2015, and a combined and weighted survey index for across the basins is also the highest that we've seen thus far, although it is below of the target that we have in our Lake Erie Lake Trout Management Plan. Abundance at age, again, this is where I start to break out some of the Klondikes in there. Those are in the yellow bars as well too, but right now we have age 5, 6, and 7 make up about 75% of our lake trout population out there. Many of those fish are those Lake Champlain strain fish, especially the ones at age 5 and age 6. The older fish are mostly Finger Lake strain fish. Again, older fish in the population right now, about 3% of the population. Our age 5 abundance index, this is something that we have in our lake trout management plan, has actually been above our goals for the last 2 years, 2014 and 2015. So we feel that there is a large number of fish out there right now above our targets that are actually spawning out in Lake Erie, and you would think that if this target was actually true, that we would begin to see some sort of signal for natural reproduction that may be happening. I will just throw in there, and Chris and Dr. Kruger will be speaking to this later. We do have a lake trout acoustic telemetry project, which will be gearing up in 2016, which will be trying to determine some more specific habitats that lake trout are going to be spawning on, and I'll leave it at that. So let's wrap back around to where we started again with our fish community goals and objectives for the Coldwater area. Again, our first one, lake trout are restored to self-sustainability and are the dominant predator. Lake trout abundance is high. In fact, adults are above our targets that we have established. However, on the negative side, we have not seen evidence of natural recruitment up to this point. Our next fish community goal and objective, burbot and coragonids are important ecologically. A burbot abundance is low and declining. There is very poor recruitment in the burbot population as of now. Lake whitefish population is depressed. Recruitment to the fishery is poor, again, due to poor recruitment in recent years. Thus, harvest is relatively low. Again, provide sustainable harvest of lake whitefish, lake trout, steelhead, and other salmonids. The main one there is lake whitefish, and their sustainability is threatened by the poor recruitment that we saw in the graphs. Steelhead are providing a stable tributary fishery right now, although it is at a level that is much lower than it was a decade ago. Cisco return is a dominant planktivore. Again, ciscos in Lake Erie are rare, 47 of them caught in the last 20 years. Thus, we feel at this point they have little ecological impact as far as our fish community goes. Sea lamprey are considered a pest species requiring control. Sea lamprey abundance is showing a downward trend, which is a positive. However, abundance remains well above targets. And again, Kevin will be talking to that in the next talk. So for our cold water fish community goal is to secure a predominantly cold water fish community in the deep offshore waters of the East Basin with lake trout and burbot as key predators. Overall, we have seen increases in lake trout, mainly due to higher levels of stocking, and they are the main predators in the offshore waters of the East Basin. However, there has been a substantial decline in Lake Erie's other cold water resources over the past decade. With that, similar to our other task groups, we do have an executive summary of our annual report out on the table in the lobby. Full reports can be found on a GLFC website or by seeing any Coldwater Task Water member. And with that, I'll answer any questions